The school's most beautiful girl invited me to prom while everyone else teased me for my looks. 20 years later, she didn't recognize me, and what I did changed her life. 20 years after prom night, the girl who once changed my life showed up at my door in the rain. It happened under circumstances neither of us could have imagined. She didn't recognize me. I recognized her instantly. And before the next night was over, I did something she never expected. The rain was coming down so hard that night, it sounded like the sky had lowered itself onto my roof. I remember standing in the kitchen with the lights off, listening to it. There's a particular kind of loneliness that only shows up on nights like that. It comes when you have a warm house, and money in the bank, and a refrigerator full of food you don't feel like eating, and still something in your chest keeps aching for a thing you can't name. I had felt it for years. I had learned to live around it the way you learn to live around an old injury, favoring one side, never quite putting your full weight down. I'd ordered dinner mostly to have a reason to stay awake. A late order, past 9, from a little family restaurant 2 towns over that still delivered when nobody else would. I wasn't even hungry. I just didn't want to be alone with the sound of the rain. When the doorbell rang, I crossed the hall and opened the door. I was expecting paper bags and a quick thank you, and the click of the latch closing me back inside my quiet life. Instead, I found the girl I had carried in my heart for 20 years, standing on my porch in a faded delivery jacket. For a second, the world went very still, the way it does right before you understand something your body already knows. The porch light caught her face under the brim of a damp baseball cap, and every part of me that had grown up and moved on and built a whole life somewhere else went right back to being 17. Charlotte. She was older, of course. We both were. There were fine lines at the corners of her eyes now, and a weariness in her shoulders that no 17-year-old ever carries. Her hair was pulled back under the cap, darker than I remembered, wet at the edges. But it was her. There was no mistaking her. I would have known her in a crowd of 10,000 people. I would have known her with my eyes closed. She held out the food with both hands, fingers trembling from the cold. I realized her whole body was shaking a little, not just her hands. "Your order, sir," she said. "Sir." Not Tyler. Not a joke about the rain. Not even a flicker of recognition crossing her face. She looked at me the way you look at a stranger whose porch you're standing on. Polite and tired and already half turned back toward the street. She had no idea who I was, and why would she? I took the bag from her, but I couldn't stop staring. Back in high school, I had been the big, grieving kid nobody looked at unless they wanted a laugh. Now I was 37. Leaner, steadier, worn smooth by 20 years of building a life from the ground up. I'd changed so completely that even people from my hometown sometimes squinted at me for a beat before they placed me. I dressed well now. I carried myself like a man who had somewhere to be. Charlotte had no reason on earth to connect this man to the overweight boy she'd once taken to prom out of pure, reckless kindness. Still, it stung. It stung more than I expected. I stood there holding a warm bag of food from a woman I'd built a small shrine to in the back of my heart, and she couldn't see me at all. "Do you want some water?" I finally managed. My voice came out rougher than I meant it to. "You look exhausted. Come in for a second, out of the rain." She shook her head, and even the shake of her head was tired. "I can't. My brother's waiting. He's not well. I'm his only caregiver." Something turned over in my chest. "Only caregiver? After our mom passed away, it's just me." She tried to smile. And it was the smile of someone who has smiled through too many hard things to do it well anymore. "Good night, sir. Stay dry." She hurried back down the steps and out through the rain. I stood in the doorway and watched her cross the driveway to a rusted old Mustang parked crooked under the street lamp. It was the kind of car you keep running on hope and duct tape long after you should have let it go. She dropped into the driver's seat and turned the key. The engine coughed. Nothing. She turned it again. It caught for half a second, then died. And then, through the sheeting rain and the yellow smear of the streetlight, I watched her drop her forehead against the steering wheel. Her shoulders started to shake, and this time it wasn't the cold. I knew that shape. I'd made that shape myself, alone in cars, alone in rooms, alone in the worst year of my life. It's the shape a person makes when they've run out of everything except the will to keep going. And even that is starting to fray. I wasn't looking at a rough night. I was looking at a hard life. I grabbed my keys off the hook by the door and I was already moving. Already halfway across my own porch, in my socks, with the rain coming down cold on the back of my neck. Then the old engine sputtered, caught, and roared reluctantly to life. She lifted her head. She wiped her face with the heel of her hand, that quick, practiced motion of someone used to pulling herself together fast. She backed out almost too quickly and disappeared into the dark and the rain. I stood in the hallway with cold takeout in one hand and my keys in the other, and a chest full of memories 20 years deep. And I did not move for a very long time. 20 years earlier, I was 17, and I was learning that grief can change a body as fast as it can change a life. In late 2005, my parents were driving home from a party when their car spun out on a wet stretch of highway. It was not so different from the one Charlotte had just driven off into. I was in the back seat. When the world stopped turning, I was the only one who came through it. I don't remember the impact. I remember the after. The strange, upside-down silence. The smell of the road. A stranger's voice telling me to hold still, help is coming. I remember the sound my own breathing made. And then I remember waking up in a hospital room that was too bright and too quiet, and knowing, before anyone said a single word, that my mother and father were gone and were not coming back. I knew it from the way my Aunt June was holding my Uncle Ray's hand, and neither of them could look at me straight. For months after that, I couldn't walk without crutches. My right leg had been rebuilt with metal I would carry for the rest of my life, and every step was a negotiation. Aunt June and Uncle Ray took me into their little house on the edge of town before the doctors had even finished explaining what recovery was going to look like. They didn't have much. They gave me all of it anyway. June cooked, and Ray drove me to appointments, and neither of them ever once made me feel like a burden, even in the long stretches when I know I must have been one. But grief is a strange animal. It doesn't just live in your heart, it gets into your habits. I stopped going anywhere after school. I stopped calling the 2 or 3 friends I'd had. I sat in the little back bedroom June had made up for me, and I ate. Not because I was hungry, but because chewing gave my hands and my mouth something to do that wasn't crying. Food was the one thing in that whole shattered year that asked nothing of me and gave something back, even if what it gave was only a few seconds of dull comfort. A sleeve of cookies, a second dinner at 11 at night, a whole bag of chips washed down to crumbs in the blue light of the television while everyone else in the house slept. The weight came on fast. Faster than I understood at the time. My leg kept me from moving, and the sadness kept me eating. And between the two of them, my body became something I no longer recognized in the mirror. Heavier, slower, softer. A stranger wearing my grief on the outside where everyone could see it. And kids at that age can find a soft spot in a person the way birds spot breadcrumbs. They don't even have to try. By the time I was back at school full-time, on my rebuilt leg with its careful limp, I wasn't Tyler anymore to half the boys and girls in the hallway. I was the whale. I don't know who started it. It doesn't matter. Those things don't have an author. They have a moment, and then they belong to everyone. They tossed it around like an inside joke that everyone was in on except me. In the cafeteria, when I sat down. Near the lockers, when I limped past. At pep rallies, in the safe, anonymous roar of a crowd, where someone could shout it and vanish back into the noise. There goes the whale. Watch the floor. Here comes the whale. The cruelest part wasn't the loud ones. It was the quiet ones. The way conversations would drop a half step when I approached. The small smirks traded over my head. The way a whole group could make me feel invisible and hyper-visible at the exact same time. I learned to eat lunch fast, in a corner, near the trash cans, so I could be the first one out. I learned which hallways were emptiest between classes. I learned to make myself small in a body that the whole school had decided was too big to forgive. I never told June or Ray how bad it was. They had already given up so much for me. I couldn't hand them my humiliation on top of everything else, so I carried it alone. And I got very good at carrying things alone. And that turned out to be a skill I would use for a long, long time. Prom season arrived that spring, and it felt less like a dance and more like one more reminder that I wasn't built for joy. April of 2006 came, with prom posters taped crook to the cinder block walls, couples whispering in corners. Girls comparing dresses by the water fountains, boys working up the nerve to ask. I already knew I wasn't going. I'd known it for weeks, the way you know the ending of a sad story you've read before. Who was going to ask the big kid with a limp to dance? Who was going to stand next to the whale for photographs that would outlive us all? Not going was the safe choice. It was the only choice that didn't end with me getting hurt. I had made my peace with it. Or I thought I had. I was at my locker one afternoon, spinning the dial with my books under one arm, when 3 boys nearby started up with their usual comments. I'd learned to let the words pass over me like weather. Most days I could. One of them nodded toward me and said, loud enough to carry, "Maybe somebody'll take you to prom, whale, if she's blind." The others laughed. It was such an old, tired cruelty that I barely flinched. I just kept my eyes on the little brass dial and waited for it to be over, the way you wait out a hard rain. Then another voice cut clean through the laughter. "He's not going with somebody blind, he's going with me." Every head in that hallway turned at once. I turned too, slowly. Sure, I'd misheard. Sure, the voice was talking about somebody else entirely. And there she was. Charlotte was standing a few feet away in her cheer uniform, her books hugged to her chest, calm as a sunrise. She was the head cheerleader. She was, by unanimous and undisputed agreement, the prettiest girl in the entire school. The kind of girl half the boys in the county genuinely believed they were a little in love with. She existed in a different atmosphere than the rest of us, and she was looking directly at me. I actually glanced behind me, because that's the reflex when you've spent a year being invisible. Surely she means someone else. Surely someone better is standing at my shoulder. She caught the look, and the corner of her mouth lifted. "No, Tyler," she said gently. "I mean you." My face went hot. My heart was slamming. Is this a joke? Because that's what a year of being the whale teaches you. It teaches you that kindness is a setup, that the world sets you up to be laughed at. And the crueler the trick, the more it comes dressed as a gift. Charlotte took a step closer, and her voice dropped, so it was just for me, even in that crowded hall. "My brother has Down syndrome," she said. "I know exactly what it feels like when people decide someone matters less just because they're different. And I've been watching you all year, Tyler. You hold the door. You pick up things people drop. You never laugh at anybody, even when they laugh at you." She held my eyes. "You're kind. That matters more than anybody in this hallway understands." And then, I will remember this until the day I die, she reached out and took both of my hands in hers, right there in the middle of the hallway, in front of every single boy who had been laughing at me one breath earlier. She held onto my hands like they were worth holding on to. Then she turned toward the three boys, who were suddenly very interested in the floor. "He's my prom date," she said, in a voice that carried all the way to the far end of the hall. "And no, I'm not blind." One of the boys looked at his shoes. Another discovered a fascinating problem with his shoelace and bent to fix it. The hallway that had been laughing at me 10 seconds before had gone completely, gorgeously silent. I felt tears sting the corners of my eyes, and I fought them back with everything I had, because crying was the last thing the whale could afford to do in public. Charlotte squeezed my hands once, firmly, like she was pressing something into me that I could keep. "Pick me up Saturday at 7, she said. I nodded like my whole life depended on it, because in a way, it did. On the drive home that afternoon, I could not stop smiling, and I could not have told you why if my life had depended on it. June and Ray took one look at my face when I climbed into the truck. They knew something enormous had happened before I said a word. "Well," Ray said, backing carefully out of the school lot, "you look like a boy who found a 20 in an old coat." "A girl asked me to prom," I said. The words felt insane in my own mouth. June turned all the way around in her seat. "A girl asked you to prom?" "Charlotte," I said. "Charlotte Reyes. She's the head cheerleader. She's—" I ran out of words. There weren't words for what Charlotte was. June's eyes filled. She reached back and gripped my knee and didn't say anything at all. And Ray drove a little slower than he needed to the rest of the way home, the way people do when they don't want a good moment to end. We found the best suit we could afford, which wasn't much, at a shop 2 towns over. June spent an evening at the kitchen table taking in the seams with her own hands, so it would fit me right. Ray ironed his own shirt 3 times the day of the dance, standing at the board in the living room, even though he wasn't the one going anywhere. When I asked him why, he just said, "A man should look sharp when something important is happening. Doesn't matter whose night it is." I understood, even then, that it was his way of being part of it. It was his way of saying, "You matter, and tonight matters, and we are in it with you." I have thought about that ironed shirt more times over the years than I could ever count. On Saturday night, I stood on Charlotte's front porch, at 7 o'clock exactly, in my taken-in suit, holding a wrist corsage. June had picked it out, and I had nearly crushed it in the car from gripping it too hard. My rebuilt leg ached from nerves. I had practiced what I would say. I had a whole opening line ready. Then Charlotte opened the door in a pale blue dress, and every practice sentence walked straight out of my body and never came back. "You look really good, Tyler," she said, and she meant it. I could tell she meant it. "You do too," I managed, which was the understatement of my entire life, and nowhere near enough. She looked like something out of a dream I didn't have the right to be having. From the truck at the curb, Uncle Ray leaned out the window and grinned. "Well, look at that. The boy still has words after all." Charlotte laughed, a real laugh, bright and unguarded, and she slipped her hand into mine like it was the most natural thing in the world, and that hand stayed in mine, all the way down the walk, all the way to the truck, all the way to the school. Ray drove us both, and Charlotte chatted with him the whole way like she'd known him for years. And I sat there in a suit that fit, holding the hand of the most beautiful girl in the county, and I couldn't quite believe I was allowed to be inside my own life. We walked into the school gym together, her hand in mine, and people stared openly. some with plain shock. A few of the girls with something sharper that I later understood was jealousy. The three boys from the hallway were there, and they looked at us, and then they looked away. And for once in my life, I did not shrink. I did not care what any of them thought. For the first time in over a year, I was walking into a room instead of wishing I could disappear out of one. And then Charlotte danced with me. I know how small that sounds. Two teenagers dancing at a prom. It happens 10,000 times a night, all over the country, every spring. But it was not small to me. It was one of the largest things that has ever happened to me. And I have had, since then, a very full life. She didn't dance with me at the edge of the floor, tucked into a dark corner where no one would see. She pulled me out into the middle of it, into the light and the noise and the mirror ball throwing spinning stars across all our faces. And she danced with me there, like I was exactly where I belonged. When the fast songs played, she was silly and unself-conscious, and she made me laugh until my sides hurt. When I started to drift toward the wall out of old habit, she caught my hand and pulled me back into the middle of things. She introduced me to people. "This is Tyler. He's my date. Isn't the music terrible tonight?" She kept looping me back into conversations I would have escaped from. She treated the entire night as if it were completely and unremarkably normal. A girl and her date having a wonderful time. Which is another way of saying she made it feel precious, because she never once let it feel like charity. During a slower song, with her hand light on my shoulder and mine barely daring to rest at her waist, I finally asked her the question that had been sitting in my chest since Wednesday afternoon. "Charlotte, why me?" She looked up at me with those wide brown eyes, and she didn't laugh, and she didn't look away, and she didn't give me some easy line. "Because," she said, "you looked like you needed someone to choose you." I have never, in 20 years, forgotten those words. I have built a life around them without even realizing I was doing it. We danced until the music slowed for the last time, and the lights came up, and the magic of the gym turned back into a gym full of streamers and paper cups. Ray was waiting outside in the truck exactly where he said he'd be. He drove us back to Charlotte's house through the quiet streets, humming along to the radio, pretending not to watch us in the rearview mirror. On her porch, under the yellow light, before she went inside, Charlotte held my hand one more time. "I had a really great night, Tyler," she said. "Thank you." I laughed softly. "I think I should be the one thanking you." She shook her head, firm about it. "No. I asked because I wanted to be there with you. Don't turn it into a favor. It wasn't a favor." Then she went inside, and I stood there a second longer than I needed to, and then I got back in the truck. Ray pulled away from the curb, glanced at me sideways, and said, "So, are you asking that girl out properly, or are you just planning to blink at her for the rest of your natural life?" "She's just a friend," I said. He snorted so hard he nearly missed the turn. "Sure she is, son. Sure she is." Graduation came fast after that, the way the end of things always does once you finally have something you don't want to end. Charlotte and I stayed friendly through those last weeks, but life was already pulling us in different directions. That's what it does to 17-year-olds who don't yet know how rare certain people are. Charlotte left for the city that summer with her widowed mother and her younger brother, chasing a modeling career that everyone who ever looked at her assumed was a certainty. I left town for college overseas, on a scholarship I'd fought for in the one good corner of that terrible year. I carried with me the same body grief had built, and no real idea how to undo it. We didn't stay in touch. There was no dramatic falling out. There was just distance, and time, and the slow current of two lives flowing apart. I told myself it was for the best. I told myself a girl like Charlotte was always going to belong to a bigger world than mine. But I kept the memory of her the way you keep a stone from a beach you loved. In your pocket, worn smooth, taken out and turned over in your fingers when no one is looking. Undoing what that year had done to my body took longer than anything else in my life. For years I tried all the things you try when you hate what you see in the mirror. Crash diets that lasted exactly as long as my willpower did, which was never very long. Gym routines built entirely on punishment, treating my own body like an enemy I was trying to beat into submission. Plan after plan that told me, in one way or another, to despise myself into being thin, and every single one of them left me heavier and more ashamed than before. Because you cannot hate yourself into a life you love. It doesn't work. It never worked. It never taught me a single thing about how I'd gotten here in the first place. What finally changed things was almost embarrassingly simple. One of my old classmates, someone I'd reconnected with years after school, mentioned an app he'd started using, something called CalMeter. He wasn't selling it. He just said, offhand, that it had helped him stop guessing. That stuck with me, because guessing was the whole problem. I had spent a decade guessing. The app didn't bark orders at me. It didn't promise a miracle by summer. The first thing it asked me to do wasn't to cut anything, or hate anything, or starve. It just asked me to look, to see, honestly, what I was actually eating. You'd point your phone at a plate, and in a couple of seconds it would tell you what was on it. The calories, the protein, the whole picture. No food scale on the counter. No looking every single thing up in a list. No grim arithmetic at the end of a long, exhausted day when I had nothing left in me to give. And seeing it changed everything. Because for the first time I understood that I had never been a weak person with no discipline. I had been a grieving kid who was never once shown that the food I reached for whenever the sadness came was quietly adding up to a second dinner most nights of my life. That wasn't a character flaw. It was a wound I'd been dressing with the only bandage I'd had. The app never shamed me for it. It just put the honest numbers in front of me, plainly, and let me make my own choices, one ordinary day at a time. It set a gentle daily target. Nothing extreme, nothing that left me shaking and starving by noon. And it let me watch the small swaps add up. The impatient part of me, the part that wanted the whole 20 years gone by Friday, hated how slow it was. But the other part of me, the part that had already failed a dozen times, finally understood that slow was the only thing that had ever lasted. A pound here, a pound there. A photograph I didn't flinch away from. A staircase that stopped leaving me winded halfway up. The body I had carried out of the worst year of my life, slowly, quietly became a body I could live inside again without apologizing for it. I rebuilt my confidence on top of that foundation, one honest day stacked on the last. And eventually I built something else too. A technology company that made me wealthier than the 17-year-old whale could ever have dreamed of being. From the outside, it looked like one of those clean, satisfying success stories people like to tell at conferences. The broken boy who made good. But inside, something never quite settled. I dated. Kind, smart, lovely women. Some of it lasted a few months. One relationship lasted nearly 2 years, and was good, right up until it quietly wasn't. My Uncle Ray, who had never in his life let a hard question sit unasked, cornered me about it one afternoon over coffee at his kitchen table. "Why doesn't a single one of them ever stick, son?" I gave him the joke I always gave. "I'm too married to my work, Ray. You know how it is." He looked at me over the rim of his cup for a long moment, the way he used to look at me when he knew I was hiding a bad grade. "No," he said finally. "I don't think that's it at all. I think you're still measuring every last one of them against one girl in a blue dress." I opened my mouth to argue, and then I closed it. Because he wasn't wrong. He was so exactly right that it took the breath out of me. I had built a whole life. I had rebuilt my own body from the ruins. I had money and a company and a good name. And somewhere underneath all of it, some part of me was still standing on a porch at 17, holding the hand of a girl who had chosen me when no one else in the world would. Waiting to feel that chosen ever again. I never expected to. You don't expect a moment like that to come back around. You just carry it. And then one stormy night, 20 years later, it rang my doorbell in a faded delivery jacket and looked me straight in the eye and did not know my name. I did not sleep that night. I sat in my dark kitchen with the untouched food going cold on the counter and the rain still coming down, and I turned it over and over. Charlotte. Delivering food. Caring for her brother alone. Crying in a car that wouldn't start. The girl who had chosen me when I was at the very bottom of my life had somehow ended up at the bottom of hers. And I had all the resources in the world, and I could not for 1 second live with doing nothing. But I had to do it carefully. I understood something about pride, because I had spent a lifetime hoarding my own. I could not just show up with a checkbook and reduce 20 years of survival to a handout. Charlotte had never once made me feel like charity, not for a single second, on the most vulnerable night of my life. I owed her the same. Whatever I did, it could not make her feel small. By the time the sky started going gray at the edges, I had a plan. I called the restaurant the moment they opened. I ordered a large dinner. And I asked, specifically, if a driver named Charlotte could bring it. When they said they'd try, I asked them to add a note to the order. Just 4 words. "You forgot something. Come back." That whole second evening, I could barely sit still. I strung the lights myself, all afternoon, my hands not quite steady. When the doorbell finally rang, I felt my heart kick so hard against my ribs that I actually put a hand to my chest, mortified, like a teenager all over again. I opened the door. Charlotte stood on the porch, pale and anxious, clutching another paper bag. The note had clearly done exactly the opposite of what I'd hoped. Did I do something wrong? The words came out in a frightened rush before I could even say hello. "Please, please don't complain to the restaurant. If you complain, they'll fire me. I need this job. I really need it. Breathe, I said, as gently as I knew how. Charlotte, breathe. You didn't do anything wrong, I promise. Come inside for a second. You deserve to see what you did. And I don't mean anything bad by that. I mean it in the best way there is. Her eyes searched my face, weighing me, deciding whether I was safe, running whatever calculations a woman runs when a strange man invites her through a door at night. I stood very still and let her decide. And then, slowly, she stepped over the threshold. I closed the door behind her and turned on the lights. Charlotte froze. The whole living room was glowing. I'd strung soft white lights across the mantel, along the shelves, around the window frames. The closest thing I could build to prom lights in a single afternoon. And on every wall, on the mantel, propped along the bookshelves, were photographs. Big ones, enlarged and framed. Photos from prom night, 2006, that Ray had kept in a shoebox in his closet for 20 years and mailed to me overnight without asking a single question when I called him at dawn and told him I needed them. There we were, 17 years old, standing by the punch bowl, laughing in the middle of the dance floor with the mirror ball throwing stars across our faces, smiling on her front porch under the yellow light. Me, looking absolutely stunned to be that happy. And Charlotte, looking the way she always looked back then. Like kindness came to her as naturally and easily as breathing. Charlotte lifted a shaking hand to her mouth. "Oh my God," she whispered. What is this? What is all this?" I looked at her, and I said the name I had never once stopped saying in the private back rooms of my own heart. The nickname only I had ever used for her. Lottie. Her head snapped toward me so fast I heard her breath catch. Tyler? Her voice cracked on it. Tyler? Hi, Lottie. She sat down hard on the edge of my couch, like her legs had simply stopped agreeing to hold her, and she started to cry. Not the quiet, controlled crying of the car in the rain, but the deep, breaking kind. The kind that has been waiting a long time for permission. I crossed the room and crouched down in front of her, my rebuilt knee protesting the way it always does, and I put my hands lightly on her shoulders. "Hey," I said. "Hey, it's okay. It's okay." "I didn't know," she kept saying, over and over, through the tears. "I swear to God I didn't know it was you. I stood right there on your porch, twice, and I didn't." "I know," I said. "I know you didn't. How could you? I'm not exactly the same guy." "You saved that boy's whole night," she said, staring at the photographs like she was watching two ghosts. "I remember him. I remember that night. I've thought about it." She stopped, wiped her face. "I've thought about it more than you'd believe." When she'd steadied enough to breathe, I sat down beside her, and I asked her the thing I needed to understand. "What happened, Lottie? You were supposed to have this big, bright, impossible life. Everyone knew it. What happened?" She looked down at her hands, at the raw knuckles and the short, practical nails of someone who worked with them. "I tried," she said quietly. "I want you to know that I really did try." And then, slowly, she told me all of it. The city. The way it swallowed a small-town girl whole. The modeling that never quite took off the way everyone had promised. A few small shoots, a lot of waiting rooms, a lot of "we'll call you." Waiting tables between castings. Helping at home in every spare hour. Then her mother getting sick, in the slow, expensive, grinding way that eats through a family's savings and then keeps eating. The bills stacking up on the kitchen counter. Time slipping away one exhausting day at a time, until the dream just, quietly, stopped being something she chased and became something she used to have. "It wasn't even the scar that ended it, in the end," she said. She pushed up the sleeve of the delivery jacket, and a pale line ran the length of her forearm. "A minor accident, years ago. A couple of the agencies noticed it, made comments. But honestly, survival ended the modeling long before the scar did. Every single time I tried to reach for something of my own, home needed me more. And you don't leave your family standing in the rain so you can go stand in a spotlight. You just don't." After her mother passed away, she said, she took every job she could get her hands on. Cleaning offices at night, cashier shifts, stocking shelves before dawn, delivery runs after dark. Whatever kept the lights on and kept her brother safe and fed. 1 year turns into 5, she said, and there was no self-pity in it, just the flat honesty of someone who stopped lying to herself. Then it's 10. Then you look up and you're 36 and you're still telling yourself the whole thing is temporary. She let out a small, broken laugh and wiped her eyes again. "God, look at you, though. You look like one of those men in the ads for watches that cost more than my car. I'm sure there are women lined up around the block to look at you." I laughed, because it was such a Charlotte thing to say, to sit there in the wreckage of her own hard luck and still find room to tease me. And then I stopped laughing, because I needed her to hear the next part with nothing standing in front of it. "Lottie," I said, "the only woman I have ever measured anybody else against, the only one, is a girl named Charlotte, who took my hands in a hallway when I was 17 and made me feel human for the first time in a year." She went very, very still. I reached up and wiped the tears from her cheeks with my thumbs, the way I'd wanted to do since I opened the door the night before and found her shaking in the rain. "You saved me long before you ever came back into my life," I said. "You did it in a single night, at a time when I had almost completely forgotten what it felt like to matter to anybody at all. I built everything I have on top of that one night. Everything. You just never knew." Her mouth trembled. "Tyler?" I leaned in, slowly enough that she could have stopped me, and I kissed her. Soft. Careful. Like something long lost finally finding its way back home after years on the road. She froze for one heartbeat, and then she kissed me back. Some moments don't need fireworks to change your whole life. Sometimes all they need is two people, finally arriving in the same place at the same time. 20 years late, soaked to the bone, and exactly on time. That was a month ago now. Charlotte quit the delivery job 2 weeks later. And I want to be clear about something, because it matters to both of us. She didn't quit because I asked her to, and she didn't quit so that I could rescue her. She quit because, for the first time in a decade, she could lift her head high enough to see that she actually had other options. That's the only kind of help I ever wanted to give her. Not a rope thrown down to someone drowning, but a hand up onto solid ground she could then stand on herself. She and her brother moved in a little while after that. His name is Danny, and he is the single best judge of character I have ever met, and he decided within about an hour that he liked me. His sister will tell you, laughing, that I have never in my life worked harder to earn anyone's approval, and she is completely right. Danny liking me is, without exaggeration, the greatest personal achievement of my entire life, and I will fight anyone who ranks the company higher. Last Sunday, I asked Charlotte to marry me. She said yes before I had even finished the question. She'll insist she waited for the whole thing. She did not. She said yes somewhere around the word would, and we can go to the recording, because Danny filmed the whole thing on my phone and has already watched it approximately 40 times. Now Aunt June is pretending she isn't crying over folders of flower samples spread across my dining room table. And Uncle Ray is wandering through my kitchen, helping himself to slice after slice of the wedding cake we're supposed to be choosing between, not eating. And generally carrying on like he personally invented the entire concept of love. This morning, he looked at Charlotte over his coffee, exactly the way he once looked at me in that truck 20 years ago, and said, "You know, I knew you two were headed somewhere the very minute I saw you at that prom. I told this fool as much in the truck on the way home." Charlotte laughed. "Good trouble? The only kind worth having," he pointed his fork at me. "This fool right here spent 20 years pretending he wasn't in love with you. 20 years. Built a whole company just to have something to do with his hands." Charlotte turned and looked at me then, smiling that same slow, warm, unhurried smile she'd worn on the dance floor in 2006. The one I'd carried in my pocket like a smooth stone for 2 decades. And in the silence between us, there were 1,000 words that neither of us needed to say out loud. Later that night, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet, she slipped her hand into mine on the couch, under all those glowing lights I still haven't taken down. "You kept those pictures all this time," she said. It wasn't quite a question. "Yeah. Why?" And I told her the plainest, truest thing I know. Because when the whole world had decided I was invisible, I said, "You're the one who made me feel worthy." I couldn't throw that away. It was the only proof I had that it had ever really happened. She took my face in both of her hands, the way she'd taken my hands in that hallway all those years ago, and she looked at me with her eyes shining, and she whispered, "Then now it's my turn. I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never, ever forget that again." Charlotte didn't make me popular that night at prom. She never cared about that, and neither, in the end, did I. What she did was so much larger, and so much quieter, and so much harder to say in words. She made me feel human again, at the exact moment I had stopped believing I still was one. And I intend to spend every single day I have left making certain she knows, all the way down to her bones, that she did.